Brothers, sisters, comrades, and fellow travelers, I'm the Stormy Poet, and welcome to this edition of Poethnic Justice. One of the things I as a writer have persistently tried to promote in the Black community is literacy, and the reason for that is not because I want to promote the act of obtaining knowledge just for the sake of having it. That's simply a form of intellectual masturbation, which is what, unfortunately, many Negroes in academia engage in. My reason for doing so is because I believe reading exercises the mind in both imagination and in its ability to communicate. When you read, you're actually creating the imagery in your head versus you watching something where the imagery is created for you. The more you do this, the more imaginative you become, i.e., the more innovative and creative you become. Also, the more you see how correct sentences are structured, the more vocabulary you pick up, and the more you see how information is effectively narrated. In turn, you train your mind to become a more effective communicator. The mind isn't trained in the same way when you watch a movie, a TV show, or even a documentary about something. These reasons were primarily why it was literally punishable by maiming or death for Black people to learn how to read and write during slavery, because the people who become more imaginative and innovative might just imagine or innovate a way to eliminate both their slavery and their slave master and produce their freedom from bondage. Plus, being able to effectively and efficiently communicate is a very powerful tool in warfare, whether that be in open armed conflicts or social and economic combat. The ability to concisely and adequately convey information is a key component to defeating an enemy or an oppressor. And furthermore, how can you solve a problem if you can't properly articulate what a problem is? How can you cure a disease that you don't even have the vocabulary to describe or depict? How then could you even persuade others to join you in your cause? And I'm not just talking about reading any kind of material like celebrity gossip or Twilight or your manga collection. Now, while there's nothing wrong with revving down from time to time and temporarily suspending your mind from the seriousness of day-to-day life by taking in a book strictly for entertainment, however, in Black people's case, unfortunately, we have a very bad habit of hyper-oversampling when it comes to our consumption of entertainment. Much of the time, when we're not at the job, where we're most likely working for some white boss, we're hell-bent on filling every waking hour with entertainment from the very moment we wake up to the time we hit the sack. And I myself was guilty of it. That wasn't until white supremacy started kicking my behind in life to the point where I could no longer drown it out with partying and getting turned up. To read a book is to invest your most precious resource, your time. And if you're going to invest your most valuable commodity into something, you better make damn sure you're getting something out of it that benefits your investment. And that's why in this edition of Poethnic Justice, I want to suggest 8 books to the family I believe to be required reading when it comes to how to survive, how to safely navigate, how to protect yourself, and how to overcome this wicked system that dominates the planet on behalf of those classified as white. And I'd like to explain why I chose each piece and what particular purpose they each serve to enhance your understanding. By the way, this list is in no particular order of importance. The first book I'd like to suggest would be none other than My Bondage and My Freedom, written by abolitionist and former slave Frederick Douglass. And one of the reasons it's the first book on my list is the fact that Frederick Douglass fully embodied what it means to be the effective and efficient communicator I alluded to earlier. And as it turns out, him being such a thorough orator and writer was a vital component in us having an honest and comprehensive understanding of the absolute horrors and sheer magnitude of human suffering that took place in order to make America the richest country in the world, the wealth his very descendants and the others who descend from the slaves are systematically locked out of. My Bondage and My Freedom is an extremely important war document. It is to American slavery what the Diary of Anne Frank is to the Jewish Holocaust, in my opinion. Being that most of the slaves couldn't read and write, there are few documents of first-hand accounts actually depicting the day-to-day conditions of an African slave and the many horrors and inhumane acts the average slave had to witness from a very young age into their elderly years. I think one of the few instances of the book that stands out to me was when the wife of one of his masters was teaching him how to read and write so that he could read the Bible. And of course, like how most Black people do when they're not sabotaged or hindered, young Frederick excelled exceedingly at it. She became proud of the fact that she had taught him so well and automatically assumed her husband would be also and made no secret of what she was doing to him. Master Hugh instead was shocked beyond disbelief at the naivete of his wife. It was then that he made it very clear to her what the true nature and rules of slavery were by immediately forbidding the continuance of her instruction and conveying to her, quote, "If you give an N-word an inch, he will take an L. He should know nothing but the will of his master and learn to obey it. If you teach that N-word how to read the Bible, there will be no keeping him. It would forever unfit him for the duties of a slave. Gee, I guess old inbred Hugh didn't want Frederick reading that part of the Bible where it says that slavery is wicked and a crime against God. I guess that would have caused a misunderstanding, you see. He then goes on to say, if you learn him how to read, he'll want to know how to write, and this accomplished, he'll be running away with himself. Now, family, they can't legally prevent you from reading and writing now, but what they can do is hide certain facts of history from you by omission, and they can convince you that having a phone in one hand and a remote control, or a blunt, or a bottle, or some junk food in the other is time well spent. They don't have to make reading and writing illegal. They can just program you to think that everything you were taught about your history was sufficient when you were in grade school and college by curriculum created by white people, and that there's no need to do any investigation on your own, and that investing time and resources into obtaining information that is going to benefit you and equip you for survival isn't as important as catching up on a season of this or that show on Netflix. Racists like Master Hugh knew what happens when people read and investigate for themselves. You're not only receiving the intricate details that paint a picture of a story or an event, but you're also physically expanding your brain's ability to empathize, analyze, and theorize. The last thing the orchestrators of systemic anti-black racism want black people to do is enhance their critical thinking skills. A group that does that eventually thinks up a way to overthrow their oppressor. From having to watch a young woman in the prime of her attractiveness be mercilessly whipped for simply falling in love with a fellow slave, to seeing people being forced to breed with one another, to working to the point of heat exhaustion and passing out only to have a slave master to come kick him in the stomach and tell him to get up, to him being torn away from family, to being brutally assaulted with a metal pipe to the head by white coworkers and not receiving any justice because there needed to be a white witness for charges to be pressed. This book painstakingly goes into detail about what life was like for a slave from childhood to adulthood. What was depicted in this book is exactly why we're owed reparations. Compensating us wholly and completely is at the very least what this government could do to have some type of minuscule atonement for the greatest crime in human history, the greatest crime in the history of the Homo sapien. The next book I consider to be required reading was written by sociologist and one of our master teachers, Mr. Neely Fuller Jr. And one of my main reasons for suggesting a united, independent compensatory code is for the simple fact I feel the information presented is not only life-changing but quite literally life-saving to a person classified as black. And white people are welcome to read the books I mentioned on this list too, by the way. To all the white people listening in who want to know more about how this system works so you can use that information to get your John Brown on, you're encouraged to check out these books also. Be my guest. Mr. Fuller regards black people globally to prisoners of war, which is exactly what we are, being that we're targeted and attacked in every area of human activity, which he identifies as economics, education, entertainment, labor, law, politics, sex, religion, war, and health. When you realize, understand, and accept that you're a prisoner of war, you learn to accept the very grave and real danger you're in at any given moment in that society. Many black people, out of pride and fear, don't like accepting that they are in such a subservient position collectively and that any group could be supreme over them. And most black people don't like accepting that imperial fact because they understand that once you acknowledge that there's a problem, you're going to have to do something. It's like how when an alcoholic denies they have a drinking problem, even though their health is declining, they're flat broke, and their relationships with their family and friends are in ruins. They see all the negative effects happening around them, but they know if they admit they have a problem, they're going to have to put in the work to fix it by going to rehab. But in no uncertain terms, Mr. Fuller makes it painfully clear how we are a completely conquered people at every societal metric. I think a takeaway from this book that had a profound effect on my understanding of how systematic racism operates was how Neely Fuller described whiteness as a royalty system, but rather than the system being based on lineage like how it was in Europe where you had a select few who could become kings and queens. Under the system of white supremacy, your royalty is based on skin color, where you have millions of kings and queens who receive unearned giveaways, guarantees, and societal privileges. Another concept I took away from this book that I consider to be earth-shattering was when Neely Fuller challenged the very concept of whiteness itself, that the very classification of humans by race is racist in and of itself. There is no different race of humans. Humans themselves are the race. For instance, who can really describe what a white man is or what a black man is? How much European or African DNA does one need to have be considered white or black? The white supremacists who run the globe get to determine which groups are allowed into whiteness, and this practice goes all the way back to America's inception. I did a podcast about a year ago entitled Origins of Racism, Why White and Black Were Invented, where I go into detail about the moment in this country's history when the concept of white and black became solidified and how the colony elitists invited the Irish into that royalty system of whiteness, under the condition that they engage in the subjugation and oppression of those classified as black. From the Irish to the Italians, the Latinos, and the Middle Easterners, all throughout this country's history, have one by one all been integrated into whitenesses for the purpose of bolstering their numbers and unifying the society around the principle that black people must be designated as the permanent underclass. That is the reason you can't point to any town, city, or country where there's an enclave of well-to-do black people that are financially doing better than the enclaves of white people living in that same area. By the way, Mr. Fuller does a podcast on YouTube by the name of Victor of RWS. Now, I think that's something to be deeply admired. Even at his advanced age, he's still beating the drum of the system of white supremacy needing to be replaced with a system of justice. A system guaranteeing that no one is harmed, especially not over a genetic fluke, and where those who need the most constructive help receive. Next up, no black empowerment book collection is complete without esteemed psychiatrist, activist, author, and agitator of white supremacists everywhere, our Queen Mother, Dr. Frances Cress Welsing's book, The ISIS Papers. Now, family, I did say this list wasn't in any particular order of importance, but to have a full grasp on the psychological basis for a group to be so obsessed with power, not having to compete on a level playing field, and with being so largely comfortable and indifferent with the mistreatment of their fellow black citizens, reading this book is mandatory. White supremacy is a self-eating organism which causes more harm and destruction to those classified as white than it does benefits, believe it or not. When it comes to things like mass shootings, which disproportionately are carried out by white men against other white people, social phenomena such as this can either directly or indirectly be attributed to the existence of systemic racism, even though it's directed at black people. Dr. Frances Cress Welsing, even though the ISIS Papers was published in 1982, went into great detail about the white man's fixation with guns and why they stockpile mass hordes of them, and the subconsciously founded fear of genetic annihilation being at the root of it, with the gun acting as the equalizer to the black male genitalia. She also covered the inherent need of those who practice white supremacy to label black people as genetically inferior, lazy, and as having lower IQs. She clarifies that, in fact, those are projections about how they feel about themselves as the white race, with their inferiority complex lying in the fact they don't produce melanin, and the ability to do so as being genetically dominant, with the laziness accusation lying in the fact that they don't feel they can compete with black people on a level playing field, hence the creation of white privilege, and with the IQ claim lying in the overwhelming innovation, creativity, and invention black people have contributed to the world all throughout history and in the current day. She makes a very clear case. If white people were inherently superior to the black race, why did they have to build a system based on lying, cheating, stealing, and murder to afford them earned rewards? If they were so awesome, such a system shouldn't have had to be erected, and they'd have no problem dismantling it and paying back the wealth that doesn't belong. From the environment being damaged in irreparable ways, to poverty of poor whites to mass shootings, to terrorism, to public health disparities, right down to rape culture can be contributed all to the system that was only intended to harm us. There's a problem though. Degeneracy can't be contained. It has spillover effects to the rest of society, which causes collateral damage to non-black people. The sad part is, most of the white people who will figure out the correlation between all these things and who will understand that they'd have to give up their privilege to alleviate society of these tragic occurrences still wouldn't do anything to fight it. Unfortunately, white privilege is a hell of a drug, and they're not trying to give it up in any appreciable numbers. They consider it as just the cost of doing a dirty business. So why then, if they know it's not in their best interest nor the best interest of their future generations, are they so hell-bent on remaining at the top of the societal hierarchy and eliminating melanated people from the face of the earth? Dr. Frances Cress Welsing makes a powerful case that their obsession is deep-seated in a subconscious fear of genetic annihilation, which explains why anti-black racism is even practiced by those who are not classified as white all around the world, from India to the Middle East to Jamaica and Vietnam. The darker you are, the more you're mistreated. She even made predictions as to what kind of tactics the white supremacists would resort to with frightening accuracy. For instance, she predicted that the black men would go from sagging pants back in the 90s to wearing dresses in 2023. It has been a tireless effort of the oppressor class to feminize black men for the purposes of eliminating fathers from the homes and decimating the warrior class of black society. Black men are never revered and praised by the dominant society for fighting against injustice. In fact, they're demonized and labeled as radical, extremists, or woke. However, people like Lil Nas X, who have absolutely no talent, are promoted and financially propped up for putting on a dress and twerking in high heels. Dr. Frances Welsing called it, and that is just one of the predictions that she made that has came to pass. She provides you with an actual motive as to why they are, to a demonic extent, so committed to keeping black people at the bottom, even if it costs them their lives or the lives of their own family members. In the words of Neely Fuller, until you understand white supremacy, what it is, and how it works, everything you think you understand will only confuse you. Next up is a book actually written by a white man, Marc Goodman, who worked as a senior advisor to Interpol, futurist in residence with the FBI, and the founder of the Future Crimes Institute at Silicon Valley's Singularity University. Now, every now and then when it comes to an Edward Snowden or a Mark Twain or a John Perkins, every now and then you'll get a white man who's willing to give the lowdown on what kind of diabolical activity the dominant society is up to. In this book, it breaks down just how much of the general population has been made willing to openly share intimate information and details about their personal lives with random strangers. Most people are unaware that just by signing up for a site like Facebook or Instagram, you're giving the site permissions you probably didn't intend, such as access to turn on your phone's camera and microphone without notifying you. That's right, family. And I'm not just talking about when you go to post a video or when you do a text to talk. Per the TOS, which you agreed to when you joined the site, they can access your device's mic and camera whenever they wish. Now, if you knew some stalker had that kind of access to your phone or tablet, you'd feel totally violated and vulnerable. But when it comes to the random strangers over at TikTok and IG, you willingly and freely grant them complete and total access. This book explains how the terms of service are purposefully written in a manner that is impossible for the average person to understand, and is done so for the purpose of deceiving you into letting companies like Google and Apple monitor every detail of your daily life. And they sell this information to third-party marketers and advertisers all over the world. I'm sure most of you have had the experience where you and a colleague happen to be talking about a particular restaurant or movie at work, and then later on that night, advertisements for the restaurant begin populating on your timeline, or for coupons on AMC tickets. Yes, family, you didn't imagine that, and it's not a coincidence. It also explains how you're giving consent in the TOS for all your pictures and videos to be sold to third parties and to be used however they see fit, and this includes pictures of your children. The book gives the example of Facebook and IG potentially selling images of children to a company like Gerber to use in a baby food advertisement. That means if you upload a picture of your son and daughter for their grandparents, you've consented to social media that the image can be used for their profits and however they see fit. Also, Google has the right to monitor all of your conversation and to use keywords in your conversations to learn about what kind of communications you're having on a daily basis, which they also sell to third-party companies. This includes if you send a conversation to someone from a Yahoo or Outlook account to their Gmail, even if you haven't signed up for a Google account. I remember someone I was dating several months back asking me why it was that I didn't post a lot on social media sites like TikTok to promote my book and my media platforms like she was for her business. I explained to her that firstly, I don't spend the majority of my time marketing my brand on social media. The majority of my time I spent is making sure I produce a product of excellence. Social media takes away that time and energy that I could be spending creating a quality product. Also, I put the bulk of my time promoting myself face-to-face in the real world, which requires networking and people skills. Social media should complement your real-world promotion, not replace it. Far too many black people are focused on getting attention rather than creating a long-lasting, thorough, and quality product. But the main reason, as I explained to her, was for the fact that part of being on code means being below the radar as much as humanly possible. Me advocating for the kinds of things I do, I don't want a whole bunch of attention like that, honestly. Now, I'm not saying I think TikTok and Facebook are using my information to track my every movement to plot my assassination or anything like that. In no way do I think so highly of myself. But my goal is to keep my digital footprint as minimal as possible for the fact that none of us, especially black people, know exactly what they're doing with our information. We live under a government that, at the moment, isn't necessarily using what people put on the internet to round people up for mass genocide, per se. But what if in the future they allowed certain industries to judge you based on what you put on the internet, or certain behaviors you engaged in that were documented by an internet company? What if they allowed insurance companies to charge you a higher premium because Google algorithms see you searching for fast food hours frequently, or because Apple phone's GPS provided information that you frequented McDonald's at least thrice a week? I'm on social media strictly for business, not for attention and likes. If those likes and shares don't translate to dollars, then it's a complete waste of time. I'm on social media strictly for the promotion of my brand and to inform the people about the condition of the environment around them. I'm not on there for the purposes of helping Mark Zuckerberg or Elon Musk become more disgustingly wealthy than they already are. Wealth built off the hard work of black people, need I mind you, nor am I on there to give the enemy more information than it already has about me. It's physically impossible for someone to completely be off the grid, but that doesn't mean we should sit up here and play as willing participants in helping people violate our privacy. The next book is by the American sociologist and one of our great master teachers, the Honorable Chancellor Williams. And one of his significant contributions to the literary world and to black civilization was none other than the timeless historical book, The Destruction of a Black Civilization. And the reason I'm suggesting this is because when it comes to understanding our history as black Americans, much of what we know begins at chattel slavery. But when it comes to what society was like in the place of our origins, both during the period of the slave trade in West Africa and before it, our knowledge is grossly lacking. After 15 years of research, Chancellor Williams gives a painstaking depiction in withering details about the state of Africa spanning hundreds of years before the slave trade to the Americas and the historical events that led up to it. It's not enough to simply know that America's slavery happened, which is the extent of what grade school and higher ed institutions will teach you about black history. What's more important is to know the why and the how. How exactly did the Europeans successfully manage to overtake millions of Africa over the span of centuries for the purposes of making them chattel? How could we avoid this happening in the future? Should history decide to repeat itself? Was it simply just because the Europeans had more advanced weapons? Were there black collaborators in the slave trade? And if so, why would they sell people into bondage who looked like them? What was the Africans' relation to the Europeans in Africa before the institution of racism was conceived? Chancellor Williams comprehensively answers all these questions in depth. Also, we were taught all throughout grade school and college that democracy originated in Europe and was perfected here in America. Was the late Professor John Oliver Killens at Howard University put it in his review of the destruction of a black civilization, quote, "This book tells us that we need not look to Europe or to Asia for an ideology, that states were set up in Africa based on the purest form of democracy long before the term was ever heard of in Europe or in Asia. Dr. Williams tells us of the kingdoms and empires of Ethiopia and around Monroe and Memphis. Then further west he takes us to places like Mali, Ghana, and Songhai, with seats of the world learning at Timbuktu. All of this testimony to the glory that was once Africa's, at a time when black was not a term of scum but a term of approbation, when men recognized the great worth of the black man and the black woman," end quote. Basically, what he's saying is that democracy is an African concept, and they were practicing it long before it was the cool thing to do. It wasn't Greece, Rome, or America who perfected democracy. Africans had already been operating under that social system long before those civilizations. Now, when it comes to books written by Robert Greene, the book that typically gets mentioned is The 48 Laws of Power, and it's definitely an informative book when it comes to decoding and understanding the psychological warfare the dominant society engages in. But I feel like before you can grasp a lot of the concepts in that book, you need to have a more broad and baseline understanding of human nature in general, which I feel the Laws of Human Nature provides adequately. I feel as though the Laws of Power, the Art of Seduction, and the 33 Strategies of War are in-depth elaborators of a certain basic concepts presented in the Laws of Human Nature, so I recommend starting with that one. Using examples of historical events and figures ranging from politics to business, war, sports, and media, Robert Greene provides a definitive portrayal of how some of the most powerful and influential people in history strategically maximize motivation, manipulation, deception, and inspiration to achieve a level of maximum prominence and to profoundly alter the course of history itself. Now, I know some of you might have a problem with wanting to read a book that teaches the art of manipulation and deception. Well, if you're not reading it because you don't want to learn how to gain power by being dishonest, you should read it for the fact that it teaches you how those same dishonest tactics could be utilized against you. Just because you might want to take the moral high ground or because you don't want to admit that people will practice immorality to dominate you doesn't mean you don't need to understand the lengths people in society are willing to go to have power over you. The more you know about their tactics, the better prepared you'll be to defend yourself against them. Common sense should tell you that. Now, the seventh book on my list deals accurately, holistically, and honestly with depicting white supremacy as a system that operates globally and how it maintains its dominance over the entire planet in a way I've never seen any document or piece of literature do quite well. Confessions of an Economic Hitman is a semi-autographical book written by John Perkins, first published in 2004. The book provides Perkins' account of his career as an engineering consultant at firm Chaz T. Main in Boston. In the book, he exposes how the American government works in lockstep with entities in the private sector to manipulate different nations into giving up their resources. That way, the American government can keep up the facade of the false ideal image it projects of itself to the world as a nation of freedom and justice, not a tyrannical nation in a perpetual state of empire building. The way this process works is that the private sector agencies, such as engineering firms, under the backing of all major political parties, are sent to consult with leaders of other nations under the banner of, quote, America wanting to promote freedom and democracy around the world, and of a sincere desire to see other nations become prosperous like them. For instance, if a country is lacking in certain infrastructure or if a region is warring with a particular faction, the U.S. will send over engineering consultants alongside ambassadors or military contractors to propose building things like dams and sewers or to manufacture weapons and artillery. They provide, quote, aid to these nations at a cost that they know they will never be able to pay off. And when they inevitably default on their loans, the U.S. comes over to take over the resources as payment, as a permanently occupying force, or at least till all the resources are used up. And other Western nations do the same. The U.S. isn't the only one. It's essentially what the UK has done to almost all of Africa, the parts that China and Russia haven't already carved up. However, if a particular nation isn't willing to play ball, that's when what Perkins refers to as the jackals are sent in. These are characters sent in to cause political division and discontent amongst that nation's citizens, or to flat out resort to carrying out either the character or literal assassination of figures deemed to be problematic, like Muammar Gaddafi, Fidel Castro, and Idi Amin, for example. Such figures get portrayed as warlords, ruthless dictators, fascists, and terrorists to the American public, as nations or factions that are inherently evil. For instance, we knew that those who knocked down the towers did it because of their hatred of America, but what the media never really informed us of is why they hated America. I remember asking that as a kid and no one could really give me a straight answer, other than they are just the bad guys and they hate the US and we're the good guys. This then justifies the US using military means to just go in and take things by force if they can't steal it the way they want to initially. And once the US has seized control of that nation's resources, they've succeeded in the complete economic colonization of them. And they don't just stop there. They can't. To make sure no disgruntled citizens ever rise up against the occupying force, they have to be colonized both culturally and mentally. That's why in places like South Africa, the black population vastly outnumbers whites, but the whites own over 90% of the wealth. To accomplish that, you have to manipulate and corrupt the citizens with Western propaganda to the point they'll denounce and condemn the cultural presence preceding the occupying force more than the actual invaders themselves. They'll go out of their way to make sure the colonizers understand they're not a threat to overthrowing them at all, and that their former way of doing things was barbaric, outdated, primitive, and immoral. Another way Perkins demonstrates how the white supremacists operate on a global scale is by displaying their utter obsession with conquering and ruling over everything to a name, including the very environment itself. No one, and I mean no one, has plundered, damaged, misused, and wasted Mother Earth more than the white supremacists. They don't just believe in conquering other human beings. All throughout history, from making idiotic attempts to climb Mount Everest to killing off endangered animals, not for food, but just to take pictures next to it and hang it up on their walls, to ruining whole entire ecosystems with oil spills and pipeline ruptures, they seek to dominate nature itself. Which is a good transition to the final book on my list. And this book is not one that you can find in any stores or on Amazon. This book was composed by none other than yours truly, the Stormy Poet. I don't think I would ever liken myself to the majestic being that is a Dr. Francis Cress Welsing, or to the impeccable esteem of our warrior scholar, Mr. Neely Fuller. I'm in no way including this book because I think I'm in any way on their level. If they're the Godzillas, then I'm the Geico lizard in my eyes compared to what they've done for black society and for me as a black man. But I wanted to include this book because it was inspired by the likes of them. As a writer, I was inspired to do my part in our fight and advocacy for a system of justice on behalf of my people. We all have our own gifts and talents to lend to the cause, and I felt this was one of the best ways for me to contribute. It is possible that one might read the books I've suggested in this podcast and think to themselves that the problem at hand is too overwhelming, too big of a Goliath to slay, or that their individual contributions to the cause would be insignificant, when that couldn't be farther from the truth. I forgot who quoted it, but if anyone remembers, please feel free to put it in the comments section. But it's something that has always stuck with me, and I'll tell you the same, family. Ain't nothing special about white folks. They're not inherently smarter than everybody else. They're not all powerful. They're not all knowing. They're not some divine, invincible beings who can't be challenged in any way. What makes the system that gives them their privilege so resilient, and the reason it's ruled over the planet for as long as it has, is for the simple fact they have a code. Whether it's some mangy, broke-down white supremacist like Susan Lawrence in some no-name town in Florida, or members of the royal family over in England, they're on code when it comes to maintaining the racial status quo. Even though they've never met, even though they live in two different countries, even though they are in two vastly different economic tiers, no one has to spell it out for them. No one has to give them instructions. Heck, they don't even need to watch a YouTube how-to video about it. Black people, on the other hand, unfortunately prescribe to doing it for selfism. If I help another black person, they might surpass me-ism, and I've got better things to do with my time than to fight for my very survivalism. The only way to combat a code rooted in wickedness and greed is with a code of conduct of our own, one grounded in truth and fairness. I didn't want to officially publish it for reasons that should be obvious, but also because my goal wasn't to turn a profit off of it. I wanted to articulate and suggest day-to-day practices and habits any man, woman, or child can engage in, and to make a case for the suggestions, I used historical references and data which are directly hyperlinked in the document for the readers to reference. As a matter of fact, one of the references I included in the book was the official code of conduct, or code of ethics, for the National Liberation Front, aka the Viet Cong, during the Vietnam War. I thought it'd be a quintessential example of what a unified code of conduct looks like, which explains how they were able to fight off the most powerful military in the world for so long. One of the codes that stands out to me the most is the code that says, quote, I swear to indulge in self-criticism, to be a model soldier of the revolution, and never to harm either the Liberation Army or Vietnam, end quote. Now family, how stronger would we be as a people if we took time to daily do introspection and to admit our faults to ourselves, such as the rampant tribalism that shattered any hopes of black unity and that allowed us to be overtaken and put into bondage. Another code says, quote, I swear that in my relationships with people, I will do three things, and eschew three things. I will respect, protect, and help the people. I will not steal, threaten, or inconvenience the people. I will do all things to win their confidence, end quote. What if we could adopt such a selfless, committed, and courageous concept toward one another? What if we committed ourselves to that kind of daily behavior with the same vigor and tenacity as the white supremacists do in deception, greed, and violence? The book is about 60 pages and is filled with plenty of references of set examples of certain practices we can adopt and apply to our own tactics. I want it to be as concise and as brief in the book as possible because time is of the essence for our people. That said, I still wanted to provide the hyperlink references so that you can go and do further research, which is another reason I didn't want to publish it officially. So family, there's the reason I wanted to suggest my, quote, own war document, if you will, on behalf of the cause. From the typical social issues we attribute to politics and class, like mass shootings, poverty, the environment, and sexism, they're simply the unfortunate cost of doing business when it comes to maintaining white privilege. I sincerely hope you're able to take away something constructive from this book. Now, there are some honorable mentions I did want to include. The Bible is a book I strongly suggest, and I know most of you might not be of the faith, but that still doesn't mean there's not a lot of constructive information you can take away from it. If for nothing else, this country operates under the ruse that its principles are rooted in, quote, Christian values. At least when some MAGA supporter starts hitting you with the Bible Belt babble, you have some wisdom to point out their blatant hypocrisy, from them not supporting reparations as being an abomination, to them being indifferent to a system that harms their black neighbors, meaning they're complicit in a satanic practice. And of course, Malcolm X's autobiography is a must-read, but I chose not to include it in this list being that I already did my synopsis of it, which you can find on this YouTube channel and podcast. And then there's Black Labor, White Wealth by Dr. Claude Anderson. And of course, They Came Before Columbus by Ivan Van Sertima, which details the African presence in the Americas long before the Europeans. And then, of course, there's George Orwell's 1984, which speaks to how most people are sheep and just don't question things in society. Now, while there are a few audiobook versions of these free on YouTube, and while I definitely can't stop any of you from going over and listening to those instead of reading them, what I can say is I recommend that you buy and read them, if for nothing else, so that you can get into the habit of investing your time and resources into activities that will actually enrich you. It's funny, when our schools tell us to study and do homework, or when our jobs tell us to go to professional development or a conference, we make it a point to invest time into those activities and to make ourselves better students and employees, yet we don't make that same effort to invest in ourselves. In closing, I'm reminded of a kids movie I saw with my niece a long time ago that most of you are probably familiar with. The name of the movie is Ratatouille, and in one of the scenes, one of the characters asked the main character if their father was aware he was reading cookbooks. The main character's reply was, "You could fill a book with the things Dad doesn't know." And they have, which is why I read. While wonderful documentaries like the Hidden Color series and Race War are iconically definitive films, they're designed to encourage you to go out and to do your own research and to use and practice what you learn in the real world. No one is going to spoon feed you the information you need to go out and make positive change. It's your responsibility and obligation to your people to search for it and obtain it on your own. To quote John Keating from the movie Dead Poets Society when he referenced Walt Whitman, "O me, O life, of the questions of these recurring, of the endless trains of the faithless, of cities filled with the foolish. What good amid these, O me, O life? Answer, that you are here, that life exists as an identity, that the powerful play goes on and you may contribute a verse, that the powerful play goes on and that you may contribute a verse. What will your verse be? And family, I ask you, what will your verse be?" One love and one justice, the Stormy Poet.